So welcome everybody. This is Nanji Mateo, the founder of interpermet.com. And this is another chapter of telephone and video remote interpreting journal. So this is a place where at the end of my work shift, I always record my insights and things that happen to me. So today I have three insights. The first one is about interpreting for a nonverbal patient. The second one is interpreting for a very, very articulate and well-spoken provider who was speaking in middle length sentences. And third, I'm going to talk a little bit about getting rusty when you are interpreting and comparing that experience with in-person interpreting. So let's get started. So those of you who are in the chat in Facebook, let me know. Please send me a message telling me, hey, I'm here, I'm listening. That's always very encouraging. And those of you who are going to watch the video later, you can join these live streams and ask questions, etc. And by following my Facebook page, Interpermet. So, okay, so let me just double check that everything is the way it's supposed to be. Once again. Okay, very well. Okay, so let's talk about the first insight, interpreting for a nonverbal physical therapy patient. So I got this call, and the first thing that the nurse tells me is like, hey, interpreter, the patient is nonverbal. They cannot speak, they just nod their head and such, and which like I really appreciated that heads up from the beginning. And then I was interpreting, and it was physical therapy instructions. So fortunately, they were very, very short instructions, nothing lengthy, nothing complicated. Things like raise your arm, lay down, push yourself a little harder, etc., etc. And the patient will be just really, really saying, like these sounds, sort of like mumbling. And the provider will let me know the patient just nodded. So that made me think about two things. So the first one is, I think providers should always let us know when the patient nods or any other gesture that we cannot see. Like for example, if he makes a movement after giving the instruction, then let me know, okay, he did that. Or for example, if they're asking him to please take off your shoes or something like that, then it's really appreciated when they do it immediately, so fast that you don't have time to interpret, but the provider lets you know, okay, he just did it, for example, because sometimes communication in person is much faster than over the phone, right? So I really appreciate when after giving instructions, they do it right away, and I know what's going on, instead of assuming that did they do it, did they not do it, I don't know. So I think that comes in very handy. My second thought is that it's in this, for nonverbal patients, you should have an in-person interpreter, because sometimes the communication is going to flow better. And that's one thing. And the other thing is that physical therapy is kind of hard to interpret over the phone, especially if they're using some sort of machines. And in this case, it was without any machines, just reaching out movements, lifting their arm, using a bar, etc. So it wasn't extremely complex with machines, but when we get involved with machines, then it becomes increasingly complex to a point where over the phone it cannot be done. So yeah, that's my first scenario. My second situation is that I was with a very, very articulate provider. She was incredibly, I think you can notice how smart somebody is by the way they speak. So she was incredibly smart, to me at least. And she would speaking short phrases, but it was so very well organized. She was not stuttering, she was not mumbling. The quality of the line was good. She stayed close to the phone. The patient barely said anything because it was just giving discharge instructions about how to walk because they had surgery, I believe, in their ankle. So she was very, very clear. And I really like that. I really like when providers know how to communicate. And unfortunately, it's instead of being the rule, is actually the exception to the rule. When providers are actually very, very articulate and are able to express themselves very, very clearly. So she was, yeah, she was also a physical therapist from like the first call. And my third experience is that I'm getting a little bit rusty, especially because I've had these past few days, I've had a lot of changes in my life, and my mind is like somewhere else, right? Like I'm a little bit distracted by all of the things that I have to do, and even if I'm not thinking about those things in the moment, I can feel like overall I'm not the same person, right? I'm not the same sharp, focused kind of person. So why do I mention that? Because it projects in certain way into the way that I perform my job. Of course, I try to manage it and do my best, but at the same time, it's like I can see it is there, and it's you really need to stay on top of your game when you are interpreting. I re I remember one of my colleagues told me that when he was interpreting every day, he was on the phones, he was like super smart. I'm sorry, not smart. His memory retention was super good, and he could remember a lot of information without even taking any notes, according to him. However, now he's not working as much. And what does that mean? And he basically told me that he cannot interpret anymore. And I think, and I this is not the first time that I hear that. They say, people who become trainers or business owners, they say, I cannot interpret anymore because I'm out of practice. I'm rusty. I haven't been doing it for so long. I mean, it's been so long since I've done this that I'm just so rusty. I feel like I cannot do it. I don't feel comfortable with interpreting anymore, or it's a challenge. So I do agree with that as well. I add myself to that list because as I become a trainer and content creator, I notice that I find it harder and harder to make time to interpret. So I have to keep you really need to be very eager to really practice every day. And when I mean every day is every single day. It's like your muscles, right? Like this body bodybuilders, right? They practice, they train hours and hours, and they watch what they eat, and they just or Olympic athletes. They are it's very, very strict and rigorous, all the things that you have to do. So that's why I keep saying that interpreters are like mental athletes, and it's very easy to get out of practice. So in a way, that has made me think like, okay, if interpreting is you in learning how to interpret well is very hard, and then once you learn how to do it, then it's even harder to stay on top of your game, right? So now I feel like if somebody it sounds a little bit rusty, I'm not so hard on them because I know how challenging this is, and they're doing their best. Especially I think that when I'm evaluating new candidates. So this also makes me think of in-person interpretation. So when I'm working in person, I just had my first in-person appointment volunteering for a nonprofit here in the Dominican Republic, and it was about business. It was business interpretation. I was giving training sessions about leadership and values, etc., and civics, etc. And in-person interpreting, you don't get to take that many notes like remote interpreters do, because everything is so fast that there is no time to take notes. Remote interpreters, you are here in your desk, you have your background, your group background, you have a very comfortable setting to take notes. It's not like taking notes, for example, sometimes in a moving car, right? Or while you're walking down the hall, or yeah. So what I'm trying to get with this is that for me, if I kept doing that in-person interpretation, my note-taking skills will suffer from that because I wouldn't take as many notes. And I really love my notes. I think they are very special and they're very useful for all those interpreters who work remotely. Of course, the coach I was working with, the person I was interpreting for, he was speaking very extremely short sentences, like 5 words at a time, literally. And that was a little bit annoying sometimes. Sometimes it wasn't. I mean, I'm glad he did that instead of the other way around, of the opposite. But we have that person speaking very, very short sentences. And then we have the other person, the provider over the phone, who was using middle length sentences, but that was fine because she was very articulate and she was able to convey full ideas at a time instead of 5 words at a time. And I think that's a much better experience. So too short, too long is also an issue. So going back to my main point, getting rusty. Yes, I think interpreters should practice their craft every day, just like a musician. I used to play the guitar, and that was like, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. And I can still remember the chords, like how to make the music. I don't know how to say this in English, like the music scale, do, re, mi, fa, so, those things. I know how to do it, but switching between one note and the other is extremely hard because I'm out of practice. So once I knew, once upon a time, how to play the guitar, but now I can't anymore because I don't practice. So the same goes with interpretation, except that interpretation is way harder than playing a guitar, because of the expectations involved and the consequences, the liability, right, of interpretation. So yeah, those are my ideas, a little bit all over the place, here and there, but I don't know, let me know in the chat if you have any comments or anything that you want to say. It would be really, really appreciated. I'm going to upload this video to YouTube, so make sure that you follow me in YouTube. It's Interpremed as well. I like Interpremed, okay? Not interpret, not with a T, just Interpremed. And Facebook as well, to keep joining more of this live stream. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any comments coming in about anything that I mentioned. And yeah. Okay, so I guess there are no questions, no comments, but thank you so much for joining, and we'll see each other another time. Bye, everybody.